the 6th day of December 2021. I hope everybody's doing good on this Monday. We got lots of news to cover. And we have a poll tonight. Is nuclear power irrelevant now that renewables are so cheap and dominant? Because renewables now the International Energy Agency, they see renewables overtaking fossil fuels by 2026. This year, and it's not the end of the year, is 290 gigawatts is equal to 333 nuclear power plants came online. They expect by 2026, 4,800 gigawatts of renewables will come online. That's equal to 5,500 nuclear power plants in just 5 years. And so that surpasses all nuclear and fossil fuel power on the entire planet by 2026. Last year, it was over 300 nuclear power plants came online of renewables. So in 24 months, that's 633 nuclear power plants in less than 2 years came online. 1 year, 11 months, right? There's 440 nuclear power plants on the planet. It took them 75 years to build them. So nuclear is going the way of the dodo birds. But what they're doing now is they're doing the drowning man routine, where they'll take everybody down with them, including the planet. Calculations of individual doses for the Tetra River cohort members. This was meltdowns and multiple meltdowns at the Mayak in a secret place in northern Ukraine. Is a mixed oxide fuel facility, but it's actually something much worse going on there, obviously. Calculations, individual doses. These numbers, you can see the people that got their name on the study. The 131 contribution was 75 to 99% of the thyroid dose. This is typical where they're afraid to talk about real isotopes. Even though that's a nasty one, don't get me wrong. Thyroid doses for about 3% of the members of the community was larger than 1 gray. 1 gray is equal to a sievert. 5 sieverts is considered a lethal dose at the one time. 1 gray, 1 sievert will cause incredible health issues for the rest of their lives and lead to a definitely early death. About 7% of the children born in 1940, 1950 had doses larger than 1 sievert. And the nuclear industry wouldn't let them escape. The scum. Chronic radioisotope effects in residents of the Tetra River. This is a former Soviet Union and Ukraine area, just for people who's not quite familiar. Chronic radioisotope effects. This is man-made anthropogenic radiation poisoning the communities. I had the documentation years ago. It was around 7,500 small communities had to abandon the Tetra River. What they were doing, they were you were using prisoners from the Soviet gulags, and they were using them to drag the fuel from the nuclear, these were breeder reactors so they can make nuclear weapons, which meant they were making a huge amount of plutonium and fission products to use in nuclear weapons. And they didn't care about health. They used prisoners, and they would just take it out and dump it into the river. And this river goes all the way down to the ocean, a long way away. I can't remember the exact numbers. This is in August 2013. That first study I showed you was 2017. In 2017, in these communities, and now they're only talking about the gamma, the iodine 131. For every 131, by the way, produced, there's 10 times more 132 and 30 times more 133. And 31 times more iodine 129 and 132 and 133 are actually, I know last night I said 10, it's actually 9 times more effective at ionizing and radiating the thyroid glands of all species, not just humans. And nobody escapes this stuff. This is a hateful industry, isn't it? Chronic, so 2013 study, 50 to 60 years after the beginning of the exposures for individuals. And where they talk about here, they only talk about strontium-90, which is a bone seeker. Through drinking contaminated river water, the river's contaminated forever, just from the Mayak, not counting Chernobyl. And other events, they actually had another meltdown there, the same as Chernobyl, and they hid it away successfully. Through drinking contaminated river water and consumption of local foodstuff, just breathing the air there it shows you how disconnected the nuclear industry actually is. The doses of internal exposure, they couldn't wait to pollute the entire planet, is what you take away from this. The doses of internal exposure from ingested radionuclides were evaluated using strontium-90 isotopes, absorbed doses in the red bone marrow, and a significant higher level on stable chromosomes, aberrations in the T cells observed in the groups of exposed individuals compared to control group. The highest levels were detected in individuals who were suspected having chronic radiation syndrome. If you're there, you have chronic radiation syndrome. If you're closer to the river, you're worse off, but there is no safe zone there. It's impossible to avoid it. The current nominal risk coefficients for radiation-induced cancers, so there's 1,800 illnesses and diseases also, it's not just cancer. This is typical of the academic world, where they rarely, if ever, allude that there's other adverse side effects based on the follow-up atomic bomb survivors. So predominantly based their calculations for what's safe and unsafe worldwide is based upon Hiroshima and Nagasaki bomb survivors. And even 76 years later, they had refused to acknowledge that they breathed in radiation. They only studied the Hiroshima and Nagasaki victims for external radiation, not internal radiation, the ultimate betrayal. And this is atypical. I mean, they actually built the cities back on nuclear bomb craters. A collective of persons exposed to short duration and high dose rates. So they don't have documentation on that stuff. And so what they done was they refused to acknowledge any illnesses from internal radiation for 76 years and set that as the standard worldwide. It's one of the central issues in radiation protection, whether these data are representative also for protracted low dose rate exposure. But in reality, they've have absurd amount of documentations on how harmful this is. It's absurd. First off, there's 4.3 million academic studies in North America alone each year. The majority of the studies, they've actually studied man-made, the best way to say this is they studied man-made radiation, anthropogenic, from nuclear power plants. They studied that radiation more than they have the original elements in the solar system. And they've weaponized it. It's in all your hospitals, murdering all your loved ones. You bring them in desperation because they're very sick, and they stick chemotherapy in them and kill them. 3% survives, And that's the typical misdiagnosis, by the way, is 3%. Radionuclides in bats used in a contaminated pan in Nevada test sites in the United States. And the ultimate insult where they claim the bats had high tritium concentrations. Because tritium is such a low emitter, you can't measure it if it's other emitters in the sample, because it'll drown out the background signal. But what you got to realize, the water is because it was a nuclear wasteland, and water pulls up there during heavy rains, and the water is radioactive, but it's containing plutonium and curium and uranium and everything else. And so the studies can't reflect that. It's very rare to see studies actually reflect the true scope of isotopes, or even to acknowledge that there's other isotopes. There are a lot of studies in marine radionuclide transfers. There's studies on atom ratios and biota collected from Manchukuo Island in Alaska. Those explosions weren't contained underground. They actually came up through the vented, and if you watch the documentaries on it, you'll see the ground go up like 25 feet and fractures the whole. Good emissions, not in a good sense, but a lot of emissions coming out of these cracks, obviously. And you contaminate the water tables. Every time it rains, fills up those cracks, and that hemorrhages eventually into the ocean, yes? Particularly in the winter times, because the water will get down to the cracks, and the water will freeze, and it'll make the cracks even wider. So over years, it can only get worse. Plutonium concentrations in 240 plutonium, 239, very nasty stuff. It's named after the devil. And so they acknowledge global fallout. Imagine that, global fallout. But you don't hear global fallout for coal or oil or gas emissions, see? They're painting you into a corner by telling you carbon is going to heat up the planet. Global fallout heats up the planet because it pulses energy every second. Included in the United States, largest was I think it was 1 megaton. Don't quote me though. Maybe it was 5 megatons. I looked it up, but I can't remember. I'm not sure if I got screen captures of it. Manchukuo Island and Adak Island, a control site. Samples were analyzed for ratios of plutonium. Pregnancy outcome and early health status of children born to the Tetra River population. We'll get to it. Calculated for incidences of stillbirths, miscarriages, neonatal mortality, lethal development defects found to be rather high, ranging from 0.2 to 4.8 sieverts. I wish I could read the rest of that study, but I don't have access to it. That's crazy numbers. That's absurd numbers. What year was that one? 1994. It's still melting down up there in Wyack, by the way. Today is a great day. 7 quotes on Ontario provincial government's new nuclear. So they're going to build, apparently. Well, they got to spend $500 million and do all kinds of engineering to. It's going to be built on one of the Ontario nuclear power plants site, they're claiming. But when you start reading through it, you realize this could take forever. They will collaborate on a small modular reactor engineering, design, and planning. In other words, they don't actually have a design yet. This is just the hype machine, eh? It's very good at being salacious. While preparing for licensing, permitting materials, performing site preparation activities, Plan to construct Canada's first commercial grid-scale small modular reactor at Darlington. Now, by 2026, there's going to be 5,500 nuclear power plants where the renewables online. So they are gone into overdrive to get the financing to get this started before the world wakes up and says, get lost, because that's coming. We're extremely excited for what this means for the future, said scumbag Heather Chalmers, scumbag of General Electric Canada. She said the reactor is the safest and simplest boiling water reactor we've ever designed. Of course, as you just see, it's not even designed. Not only that, there's nothing safe about the small modular reactors. They're going to be using mixed oxide fuel. So in order to produce the mixed oxide fuel, you got to pollute the entire Arctic with fallout in other countries. We think this project will benefit all of Ontario. Really? A little tiny small modular reactor putting out half the power of a coal, oil, or gas plant is going to benefit all of Ontario, is it? You moron. You despicable moron. How dare you imply that that's going to be part of decarbonization efforts? You ridiculous monster. Nuclear is, and there's a lot of them, unfortunately, today. Nuclear is necessary to get the net zero, says cheerleading lapdog. And they don't even put their name on this one, I don't think. Yeah, Fred. We can and must put Canada at the forefront of demonstrating that the expansion of nuclear power, excluding the introduction of small advanced reactors, need to be a key component of our collective climate change action. There were 333 nuclear power plants where the renewables came online this year. Take them 10 years to develop it, 10 years to get the kinks out of it. This is the death throw of the nuclear industry, and they're at their most dangerous in their death throw, trust me. They'll take the whole ship down with them in order to survive. The multi-billion-dollar start of a nuclear fusion boom. Not two. Get used to it. It comes all the time. I come in twos, right? Scientists have been working for a nuclear fusion technology since the 1950s. And all their ideas come from one guy who's not alive anymore. None of them got a fresh idea. The latest wave of infusion of cash into fusion startups, because renewables now are about to make fusion irrelevant. See? So they're gone in a crazy land now, and the nuclear industry gone nutty land, and they're a very dangerous creature in their death throes. We're seeing the death throw of the nuclear industry, believe it or not. It ain't going to go away right away, but it ain't going to advance. It ain't going to take over. The running joke is that a practical nuclear fusion power plant could still be 50 years away, which is... So the suns, the stars, the fusion on a star is not something you can stick in a bottle or in a building, right? Because it can throw off, and it does, we know it as solar storms, where it throws off this incredible amount of energy in order to, otherwise it'll just blow the sun up, basically. It has to throw off the excess energy. And so the industry loves tooling around with stuff like this. If it takes 1,000 years, as long as it got something to do with nuclear, they'll burn endless money on that project. It can't work on ticks. They need to throw away the manual and redo it, because they want to use the world's biggest magnets, the most expensive, all the precious metals on the planet, to create the world's biggest magnet, and they have. And then they need the same energy as 3,800, over 7,000 Hiroshima-sized bombs just to get it to work. And so you got to produce all this energy just to make it go click, 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 get the solenoid switch going. And when you finally get it going, you're going to have endless energy, is the theory, right? But wind and solar, and if you used pumped hydro and compressed air for storage, among others, but they're extremely environmentally friendly, right? You pump water up a hill with excess energy, and you compressed air into tunnels or mine shafts that you dug, low pressure, and you have sustainable backup now for extended periods at high capacity. You have peak power constantly at your fingertips. And so what I'm seeing anyway, even though it could be a good idea, it could work out, who knows. I'm not for it personally, but it could work out. Anything's possible, right? You know, it's like a puncher's chance, right? That it could work. But the sun is going to be shining for a few more billion years. The wind's going to be blowing. The tide is never going to change. It's always consistent. Water goes the same way down a drain in North America, no matter where you go, right? And on the other side of the planet, it goes the opposite way, but it's consistent. You can make devices, you know, that are able to capitalize on those attributes. But pumped hydro and compressed air is obsolete technology, and it will solve. You don't need batteries, you don't need salt, you don't need sophisticated this, you don't need experimental that. You haven't got to dream up this, dream up that. It's available, it's widely available. The air, you can pump it anywhere on the planet, you can find air. And anywhere on the planet, there's 500,000 spots on the planet that are natural spots, you can have pumped hydro. Are available. Why ignore it? I don't. There's a lot of money coming in renewables. All the money coming in the near future is renewables. If you don't come on board, you will miss that friggin' train. Helion Energy announced it had raised $500,000 in its latest fundraising round. Well, $500,000 is enough to pay the scientists some overtime. It's nothing in this scale of what we're talking about. They won't even pay for the electricity to fire it up, see? Once again, it can't run on its own electricity. It needs an enormous amount of electricity to run, but it can produce an enormous amount back into the grid, so to speak. But it's going to need most of the power plants on the planet just to run consistent. You got 1.7 billion for the next one. Canada General Fusions this week closed 130 million fundraising. Like $130 million is not even enough to buy their sites for the job they need to do. Experimentally wise, Canada used to have a small fusion project so they can sell parts to other countries, right? Oh, well, we need heat shields that can do this. All of a sudden they realize, and we need stuff to hold the big magnets and blah, blah, blah. We need, to get the reactors to work the way they work now, they have to pressurize these things around 60 atmospheres. It's around 900 psi, say. It varies, right? But say around 900 psi. So, like, if your car tire was 900 psi and you put too much air into it and it blew up, how much damage do you think that's going to do? So when a nuclear power plant blows up, it's at 900 psi. So you don't have to see pictures to know it's going to be bad. You really don't, right? Because physics dictates that nothing can withstand it once it gives. Yeah, it's a sign of the industry growing up. The industry can never grow up. It's full of inbreeds. The inbreeds of the inbreeds of the inbreeds, and got their children kooky little jobs because they're a failure at everything else. The experimental reactors will generate about 100 megawatts of heat energy in pulses of 10-second bursts, big enough to power a city. But it needs that much power just to fire up and sustain itself. It's not going to run on its own. The team anticipates the output will be more than twice the power used to heat the plasma, which means you're going to have to dedicate hundreds of power plants to keep it running. But then it'll produce a couple of hundred extra more power plants worth of energy. This is the cardboard house they're selling anyway. The power magnets will generate a powerful magnetic field equal to 1,000,000 times stronger than the Earth's magnetic field. And you're going to put that in a building. Yeah, the fusion's not going to cause no radioactive fallout because there'll be nothing left alive for a couple of 100 miles when that thing goes pop. Like 1,000,000 times stronger than Earth's magnetic field to keep the fusion, is it? Well, let's get you a little spot up on the moon. Let's get that little nuclear reactor. Hurry up and build that shit up on the moon so they can go to frig up there out of the way. We don't want them doing that on this planet, trust me. Report, bit by bit, the noose is tightening around the nuclear weapons industry. That's a great story, by the way. Human beings are not necessarily destined to annihilate ourselves. I don't know, man. The fusion people got the shit scared out of me. The business of nuclear weapons, and it is, in fact, a business. It's biggest business on the planet, the nuclear industry. Killing animals for the nuclear industry is the second biggest one on the planet. No two animals died of the same cancers. PAC's newspaper, when PAC's pluralist profiteering, we actually covered that story is what I meant to say. Should be front page news around the world, and it should. Why is it not an interesting question? Nuclear war is still a threat to humanity. And the bulletin of scumbag scientists, they're created this doomsday clock in 1947. But if you look at all the people that are at the head of the bulletin of atomic scientists, right? They got secretaries of state, they got all the bootlickers from the industry. This is actually just a lobbying group. And it's managed to ingratiate itself into a majority of the population of the planet. And now it's being used to bludgeon humanity's common sense with nonsense. They shouldn't exist. They have no right to exist. It's just a lobbying group, like the World Nuclear Association is a lobbying group. They're just a lobbying group. America's Northrop Grumman makes the most money off nukes. That's interesting. And the Raytheon Technologies and Lockheed Martin are close behind. In fact, if Northrop Grumman comes to a stop all of a sudden, Lockheed and Raytheon will bury their head up in, you know what I'm talking about anyway. It is a worldwide industry with companies in Europe, Airbus, India, Russia, Rostec, China, aerospace science, and profiting from the potential end of the world. Huge profits. And at least 338 companies are investors in or facilitators of the nuclear industry, and they may own stock in nuclear corporations, hold their bonds, or underwrite their debt offerings. In any case, the system can't function without these companies. The largest investor in the nuclear industry is Vanguard, with 51 billion, followed a few paces behind by BlackRock with 41 billion. These cases do not involve a few individuals who investments in nuclear weapons, but rather millions of people who invest in Vanguard and BlackRock mutual funds and hence owns small amounts of many companies, including ones like, and then pension companies. Unbelievable that pension companies would be invested in nuclear weapons. It's absolutely, but what it shows you is that the people running the pension companies are not who the world thinks they are. These are actual monsters who got the job to spend the money, to direct the money towards the nuclear industry, take over the pension companies, with well-placed double agents for the nuclear industry, basically. The 56 countries were lobbyists from the nuclear, and lobbying should, and it is illegal under the Bill of Rights, the Constitutions, Magna Cartas worldwide, and they changed the slavery laws to include corporations, gave corporations certain facets of human rights, piggybacked in off the slavery laws in the 30s. Justice Hugo Black, Supreme Court Justice at that time, had wrote an eloquent dissent of how absurd it was that amendment meant to free slaves from an oppressive government was used by corporations now to oppress a sovereign people. Because nuclear is not supposed to be on a stock market, for starters, right? And you can't put the nuclear company in jail. You can't put Mark Zuckerberg at Facebook in jail because Facebook is the company. Right? Because by giving the company human rights, you got rid of Mark. He gets to kick, he owns shares, but you can't put all the shareholders in jail. If you put Mark Zuckerberg in jail, you got to put millions of shareholders in jail too, because they're all one and the same. See? This is how they protected themselves, and this is how there's no incentive not to be evil. And this is what these companies have taken advantage of. PAX is part of the international campaign to abolish nuclear weapons, though. ICANN won the Nobel Peace Prize in 2017 for its role in the promotion of the treaty and the prohibition of nuclear weapons, which is adopted that year by United Nations, which is a corporation of 193 militaries. It's just a corporation like McDonald's or Walmart, except it's a military-industrial complex. Just ask North Korea, the loved ones of 3 million people that the United Nations killed in the 50s, because they're a military-industrial complex, right? That's what they were built on originally, and they still are. The 56 countries that have ratified the treaty to date have agreed not to develop, test, produce, manufacture, otherwise acquire, possess, or stockpile nuclear weapons. And if the Netherlands were to ratify the treaty, Airbus, headquartered there, could no longer help build France's nuclear missiles. So in one sense, it does matter. So they would have to move to a different country that was friendly to the nukes. ICANN believes that the government of such countries can be forced by pressure from the citizens to ratify the treaty and cut ties with the scumbag industry. It also believes the campaign calling on pensions, and mutual funds to divest from the nuclear industry. Right, so the nuclear industry they seeded the funds and investment corporations, stuff like that, with their players. And then when you get in, finally, could have took a decade or 2 decades, and you finally got control of most of the big ones, then if the nuclear industry needs money, they start selling stocks. It's an insidious thing that they're doing. But the saving grace, hopefully, for this planet will be the fact that renewables now are able to bludgeon all other energy sources, including nuclear. And nuclear has to go at all costs. But it sets the stage for the future, right? It's not going to be overnight, obviously. But it's right now we've seen this snowball effect from just a few small wins. I also believe the campaign calling on pension funds. It's not a vain dream, given that divestment campaigns played a similar role in the international isolations of apartheid South Africa, which was engineered, by the way, by the English. Well, it's almost unknown to Americans. Nuclear divestment campaign is already happening. The second largest pension funds on earth in Norway sold its investments in the nuclear industry. And ABP in the Netherlands, the world's 5th largest pension fund, just done likewise. And that's a big blow to the scumbag industry. They got to pawn off those shares on unsuspecting people now in the future, see? And the general trend the report indicates is downward. The 338 financial institutions that invest in or facilitate the nuclear industry is down from 390 recently. Shareholding values are down 67 billion and bond holding by 2 billion. 69 billion, that's a significant kick in the teeth. Fred Baser lowered the temperature with new generations of nuclear power. What a degenerate sack of no good this creep turned out to be. How safe are nuclear power plants, scumbags? Well, there have been 2 nuclear power plants accidents that are classified as major, Fukushima and Chernobyl. Really? By the way, Santa Susana nuclear meltdown, a sodium reactor like Bill Gates is going to attempt to build, that I don't really see coming to fruition because of the sudden spike in the last 2 years of renewables, is 460 times more radiation released than 3 Mile Island. 3 Mile Island contaminated around 2 million people. And there was a large amount of cancers. There was radioactive plumes. They hid it away, just like they done with Santa Susana in 1959. That was actually hid away for 55 years. They successfully... Like Sellafield in the United Kingdom used to be called Windscale. And it melted down. This also was a mixed oxide fuel facility. Because you got to realize that industrial poison, you know how bad that's going to be. Well, nuclear is 1 billion times more toxic than industrial poison to all species, not just humans. Despite the devastation caused by the events, the Fukushima facility's safety protocol limited radiation exposure. Really? To who? To the mole people underground or something? Because Fukushima radioactive fallout actually covered the entire planet. You know, planet Earth. Fred. This is radioactive fallout. That's pretty arrogant to come out and claim that the Fukushima facilities limited radiation exposure when that's all it covered the entire planet, still going on today. You got a lot of nerve pretending you're a human there, Freddy boy. So overall fatalities, injuries, and illnesses from nuclear accidents have been far fewer than those caused by fossil fuel facilities. You wiped out all the species in the Pacific, man. All the coastline. We've done research expeditions for 6 years, 4 to 5 months. And that documentation is up at the nuclearproctologist.org, where I hang my shingle. But you wiped out all the species. You got endless emaciated birds, endless emaciated seals, endless emaciated whales for 10 years. Endless stories of it. Catastrophic extinction event playing out. And your job is to go out and be a scumbag. And then using Wikipedia as a source? Come on, man. You cracker, you. And then they used World Health Organization, which is United Nations, which is 193 militaries. So you're claiming that the Wikipedia report in 2012 that biomass killed approximately 3 million deaths in urban areas annually. Right? There's so many variations of that lie. The lie comes from James Hansen originally. Wikipedia just puts up... They went in and would put that there in Wikipedia, and then they quoted it, right? Yeah, well, hang on. One day, years ago, I used to be able to just put one letter in and then everything with that would show up. Now I have so much. That's the last thing I'm going to do. Here's what James Hansen actually said. This all go back to James Hansen, right? If you scroll down, 1.8 million air pollution caused deaths from 1971 to 2009. 2009. Whereas their study was based on 2012, right? So where did 2012 was a year after Fukushima, by the way. And so the numbers were, it estimated 1.8 million between 1971 and 2009, 28 years, which is 64,000 people dying a year by pollution. 64,000. Net zero, another record year for renewable energy, says the International Energy Agency. Net zero, which was Miles Allen, right? He came up with net zero. IEA released Wednesday, says renewable energy will account for 95% of the increase in power generation from now till the end of 2026. And should the trend continue, renewable energy capacity would exceed that of fossil fuel and nuclear energy combined by 2026, which is 5,500 nuclear power plants worth of renewable energies. So this year was 290 gigawatts renewable capacity was added this year. It's not even the end of the year. And by 2026, 4,800 gigawatts of renewables will be on this planet extra than what is right now, which is between now and 2026 will be 5,500 nuclear power plants worth of renewables. So nuclear is panicking because this over the next couple of years, this starts snowballing. Everybody's going to go piss on nuclear's grave every day for the rest of their lives. Not in my backyard, the thorny issue of storing German nuclear waste. German authorities have set a deadline of 2031 to find a permanent storage location. For now, the waste is being stored in temporary locations, hemorrhaging into the environment. Isotopes all day, every day. French wind demands 50 gigawatts offshore goal. Gigawatts by 4,800 gigawatts worldwide. So France is not really pushing at all, and so that's a big deal for France, basically, what you're seeing there. China and NASA space race become a nuclear competition. The orbit of Earth is currently seeing more rockets as the National Aeronautics Space Administration punches holes in the ozone, and the Chinese government and other state-backed agencies and independent space companies are punching the crap out of our life-sustaining ozone with these big, stupid gas guzzlers. And they go right up in the upper tropics, right up in the edge of space where they're spewing out incredible amounts of pollution, and then that stays there and blocks out the sun. Landers and rovers is part of the mission to Mars. They can't go to the moon, but they're heading to Mars all the time. It's really weird. We're living in a very strange time. And then lobbing missiles. And like Bill Gates says he's going to build a reactor, and all the media uses that now as the reason why nuclear is good. Well, Bill Gates is going to build one, Dana. Like, yeah, so what? Good for him. He's not actually going to get it built, of course, but China cannot afford the cost of losing this race. What race? Putting weapons in space, maybe? Twitter anti-info manipulation efforts. Removes thousands of state-backed accounts. China has the most. Twitter anti-information manipulation efforts remove thousands of state-backed accounts in various countries. Thousands. They removed mine there a couple of years ago, talking about nuclear as a crime on Twitter. Twitter, of course, was funded in 2006. There was the CEOs of Twitter. There was an FBI and somebody from the CIA were doing an interview for a major documentary filmmaker. And the CIA and it's like, yeah, no, we're funding this startup because it's a great idea, and everything is going to be archived in Congress and blah 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 blah. And then people just bought into it, and they just like, oh, maybe we shouldn't have mentioned that. I still got that clip there somewhere. I got the whole interview there somewhere. Today we're disclosing an additional 3,465 accounts to our archive of state-linked information operations. This is false flags accounts. Not the first time Twitter done this. In 2018, the firm released a report of 37 data sets showing platform manipulation campaigns from 17 countries, over 200 million tweets. 200 million tweets of propaganda. 200 million propaganda tweets from organized crime groups known as governments. That's pretty impressive, yeah? That's pretty impressive no matter how you look at it. So the nuclear industry is a plague, eh? Including China, Russia, Tanzania, Uganda, Venezuela, and Mexico all had allegedly government accounts. Twitter has 328 million users worldwide. I Twittered pictures to Greenpeace 30 to 40 times of the fake building and the real building, and I think they blocked me. To a broadcaster tool of politicians and corporations. Twitter was for the startup and for the public, which is funded by the CIA and the FBI. Because I watched the interview, trust me, that's real. I'm not making it up. I got no reason to make this stuff up. To a broadcast tool of politicians and corporations in 2017. So do you think it stopped since 2017? They went back? No. A total of 276 fake accounts were removed in the case of Mexico. Twitter explained it did this to support the country's government, because the country government was under siege from people trying to expose them for being monsters. When it comes to preventing misinformation related to health, obviously this got something to do with the United Nations and the coronavirus. I done a video on coronavirus about a month ago. They took it down right away and gave me a strike on my account and said you're not allowed to argue about this. Yeah? They done the same thing with a 911 video. Took it down right away and said you're not allowed to argue about this. This is already established. A social networking site telling you can't have a conversation. It's not so this is lobbying, and governments are doing it to you. And politics. On the other hand, only 16 accounts connected with the IRA were removed. Remember, the British were attacking themselves, blowing up their own people, and blaming it on the IRA. It came out, and they had done that for decades. Every time there was a scandal, for instance, in the palaces, with the lot in the palaces, the Queen and Prince Charles and the rest of it. Every time there's a real scandal, then they would blow up some of their own people and blame it on the IRA, and all the media would scream, the IRA is going to get you. You're all going to have to be talking like the IRA in the near future if you don't give us endless power and all your guns. Twitter announced that it removed 2,000 accounts connected to the Chinese Communist Party, and the company explained they are connected to how China treats a certain population in Xinjiang. Well, everybody knows this is going on. It's either ban China or move on, unfortunately. On the other hand, another 112 accounts were also banned from social media. Because, if you look at what China's doing, and you got to talk about what Israel has done to the Palestinians, of course, you have to talk about all people that feel that they didn't get their own, which is what we should have been doing and still could. And they replaced their Twitter CEO because they probably didn't agree with it. Oh, and Twitter now prepares a new feature, the so-called downvotes, which is Twitter anti-info manipulation, right? And so you come and downvote you, you disappear. That's what they're doing here on YouTube too, right? Oh, to be in a normal world. South Korea offers to rehabilitate the Philippines nuclear power plant. This is an old abandoned power plant under Marcos. 5 fast facts about spent nuclear fuel. This was linked from the story. And the problem with spent fuel is that it's pulsing energy every second. It's still splitting the atom. So how do you make power? You put the fuel rods in the reactor, you get it up to 60 psi or 60 atmospheric pressures, and then you start changing the fuel. Now it's splitting the atom. Once you turn the reactor off, the fuel, you can't turn the fuel off. It's still splitting the atoms. But instead of powering millions of homes, it's too fragile. It has billions and billions of microscopic cracks in the cladding, in the zirconium claddings, and which means it can split and release more atoms, right? And then that's put into a fuel pool with no containment. Of course, once you open up the reactor to change some of the fuel, all the radiation now hemorrhages out. This is why they bring in 1,000 temporary workers. The whole thing is unbelievable and hideously corrupt. Unbelievably corrupt. But nuclear, the biggest myths about nuclear waste, again, just perpetual lies. Endless lies, eh? Yeah. However, politicians got out of the way. The waste could easily become nuclear fuel again. At the time of mixed oxide fuel. Current reactors used in the US can only extract about 3 to 5% of the available energy in the nuclear fuel before it's considered spent. It's not considered spent, it's considered too dangerous to keep in the reactor. And so when you put it in a pool, for the rest of its billion-year lifespan, is splitting atoms that are hemorrhaging into the environment. And so they surround these facilities with farms right up to the fences. Almost all nuclear power plants are surrounded right up to the fence. As far as you can see, from the very top of the highest building stacks is farm country. And then they ship that food to you. And they laugh about it. They murder you in a slow kill and your friends and your families when you eat the food from around nuclear power plants. If you're eating food within 100 miles of a nuclear power plant, you're being poisoned. And then the evidence would be, you would see this incredible increase of heart problems and liver problems and lung and respiratory and pituitary and thyroid and adrenaline. You'll see huge spikes within 100 miles of a nuclear power plant of Alzheimer's and dementia and autism, diabetes and Down syndrome, schizophrenia. Endless health problems compared to areas where there is no nuclear. Luckily, with novel nuclear reactors on the horizon, we may yet be able to utilize our stored spent nuclear fuel. So the time with the small modular reactors work best if you give them a high energy source to work with, which is mixed oxide fuel. But the mixed oxide fuel, of course, that's going to hemorrhage radiation from these sites. You can't contain the radiation. You can't contain the radioactive waters. And there's no need of it because by 2026, there's going to be an extra 5,500 nuclear power plants worth of renewables. Which means, because what happens is you get, if we didn't have so much lockdown going on, this would double every year, right? So then the year after that, theoretically, would have been 10,000 nuclear power plants worth of renewables come online. But in 2026, you're going to have the equivalent in nuclear or renewables of all power sources fossil fuels and nuclear, the biggest ones on the planet. So the year after that, you're into the excess. We're going to conquer our power supplies at the rate we're going. Now, if the government green lights things, we can produce around 7,000 nuclear power plants with renewable energy by 2026. And if they kick in, if universities start going, yeah, this is cool, let's get at it, then they can make it even incredibly more effective by 2026. But they will kill the planet rather than do that, because they worship evilness and death and destruction. This is a model of the radiation fallout from France, modeling of Japan's venting, not the actual emissions, but the venting. So they covered the whole planet in radioactive fallout in a very short time with an absurd amount of radiation that's not going to go away forever. And when I say forever, I mean forever. And so we can't come up with solutions because we won't admit we got a problem. And we can come up with solutions. We can come up with filtration systems. Yeah, it's going to take time. We can't save the species that have been exterminated already in the last decade by Fukushima. But that ain't going to slow down either. Look at the plume. That's not like a plume that's floating along. This is covering a continuous plume, covering the entire planet. This, I think, was based on 16 days, this model, from France. Reactor designs that might debut in the 2030s, but by 2026, we're going to have an extra 5,500 nuclear power plants worth of renewable energy online. And so compressed air and pumped hydro storage makes this obsolete, makes this stupid. Just even talking about this is stupid. The fact they're even trying to do it is stupid, but that's the whole point, is the world won't wait for another couple of years to the renewable, because that's real, man. Like when that came out yesterday or the day before, that the International Energy Agency said there's 290 gigawatts, which is 333 nuclear power plants equivalent of renewable energy, came online already in 11 months of this year, which is more than last year, which was over 300 nuclear power plants with renewables. 633 nuclear power plants with renewables. That's steamrolling. We're steamrolling at this. And we can eliminate gas, oil, and coal, but that's not going to change the global warming. Global warming is caused by Fukushima radioactive fallout, pulsing energy every second. But it's a start, right? It's a great start. And then, like the World Nuclear Association is a lobbying group. These are not bipartisan. These are lobbyists. And they're evil lobbyists too, right? They're incredibly monstrous lobbyists. They'll cut your throat to promote nuclear. Since the dawn of the civil nuclear power industry, it was never civil, it was military, and always is and always will be. Nuclear waste never caused harm to people. Wow. This is absurdness, by the way. Saying nuclear waste never hurt anybody. That's the definition of... That's the problem with nuclear. There's no incentive to be honest. Though reality tells us that properly handled nuclear waste is innocuous, not really waste at all. Like, I can't possibly articulate the disrespect I have for that person that wrote that, or the contempt that I have for the media that published it. The arrogance of the people who sat in silence and never challenged them so they feel they can do it. Doosan Corporation demonstrate green hydrogen production using steam from nuclear power plant. Hydrogen is the most carbon intensive thing on the planet. On top of that, activists Holtec walk back plans to dump nuclear water into Cape Cod. Because we covered that yesterday, right? Kuwaiti paper says drones infiltrated Iran's airspace. They're going to boil it off, most likely, to scum. That's the nuclear industry. It's just nothing but scum. Kuwait paper says drones infiltrated Iran's airspace to spy on nuclear power plants. And if they crash that into a transformer going into the plant, they can shut off external power. Which means the plant has to start up generators. Plants don't run on their own power, right? Kuwait paper says drones infiltrated it. When did Superman first casually survive a nuclear explosion? Well, like, I know this is going to come as a surprise, but he's a cartoon. Krypton. Krypton isotopes will kill you, by the way. It was created to indoctrinate the children. See, just like Spider-Man. Of course, they got to mention Spider-Man because it's the nuclear industry. In fact, children no longer even call their parents or their grandparents heroes. In fact, they're afraid of their grandparents after watching South Park and all the other cartoons that vilified older people. All we want is metal. United Kingdom veterans urge the government to honor nuclear test survivors. Because so many of them have died of brutal diseases, and the nuclear industry refuses worldwide to acknowledge the veterans. In fact, I covered a headline a while back was Boris Johnson, of course. Prime Minister Johnson looked the veterans in the eye and tell them they're not sick. He has health problems ever since he watched the nuclear detonations blow dust all over him. The studies that we're seeing in UK so far have been very narrow on illnesses from nuclear weapons testing. They only focus on certain types of cancer, and they're not looked at the wider picture: genetic defeats, miscarriages, impacts of other family members. But there's endless illnesses and diseases, right? Endless. It's literally endless diseases. Justices turned down California nuclear waste cleanup. California Public Safety Group's bid to stop Holtec, again Holtec, International Corporation nuclear waste disposal practices at an old San Diego power plant won't be reviewed by the U.S. Supreme Court. They wanted to stop Holtec's work at San Onofre nuclear generating station, but the Court of Appeals won't allow an injunctive relief against the Nuclear Regulatory Commission's private, and then we don't know what the hell they're talking about. But see, the Nuclear Regulatory Commission is supposed to be on your side, right? That's supposed to be their job. No, their job is to promote nuclear and hide anything that doesn't promote nuclear. We need to fire them all and replace them with humans. Check your DNA before you hire anybody. Incoming Savannah River nuclear waste team. Like, is this some kind of sick joke saying the Savannah River got a nuclear waste team? 90% of their money goes to administration, for starters. So yeah, they got a big team that never leaves the office and is not going to go out and get sick to prove a point. They're not going to go out and go around nuclear just to prove a point. France reassures Tahiti about nuclear legacy 70 years later. Still denying that they radiated everybody. Still denying the jelly babies are because of all the nuclear testing. Still denying that there was adverse side effects from radioactive fallout. Even though they went there to avoid the adverse effects in their own country. No, they're lunatics. And to claim anything other... Let me reassure Tahiti about nuclear legacy. They produced a study said there was no adverse side effects for 70 years. That's the definition of evilness. That's the problem with nuclear. Everybody in the nuclear industry knows you got to be evil to work in nuclear. Or somebody said, well, he's a good guy, I got to get rid of him. He's liable to do the right thing. If he does an interview, he's going to tell the truth. You got to get rid of him. Enough power. Nuclear plant wastage of funds. water guzzling plants to worsen crisis, right? And when you really start looking at nuclear, you see this incredible disconnect of the human and animal, insect, and ecosystem is all their garbage dump. They hate humanity and they hate 8 million species. U.S. military needs to realize the magic bullets don't win wars. Yeah, you can blow each other up, but who won? And how do you win when you blow up an entire country? What if weapons were turned into food for the hungry? In 1961, we were taught to climb on our school desks, tuck our heads down and cover them with our hands and kiss your soul goodbye. This was to prepare us for a nuclear blast. Today, with our choice to militarize our fear, the U.S. is producing 53% of the world's weapons. In 2021, we spent $44 billion on nuclear weapons alone. And violence has become the nation's leading industry. Violence has become the government's leading industry. And since 1940, the U.S. has spent over $5.5 trillion developing weapons you can't use, to the point where we now have the capacity to destroy our planet 10 times over. And if 10% of the U.S. military budget, which was last year $725 billion that we know about, was reinvested into foreign aid and development, we could care for the basic needs of the entire planet with just 10% of the U.S. military budget. Lawmakers expected to pass resolutions supporting radiation exposure compensation for Guam. More support is underway for the long-standing efforts to get compensation for Guam's radiation victims of the U.S. nuclear testing in the Pacific during the 1940s and 50s, and senators are expected to pass a resolution. I was told a few weeks ago that I had support was on its way to help me and it never showed up. I never get my hopes up anymore anyway, but at this a long time. But how do I run a big operation like mine when I have to struggle constantly just for the basic stuff? I can't get the equipment I need for this winter, for starters, right? I made a choice on what I was going to get, because you couldn't get the equipment you need, you can't get it, right? I don't understand why no foundations, anti-nuclear foundations. I know I'm not the best person in the world, I get that. I know there's a lot better, nicer, prettier looking people out there, a lot more politically correct people out there, etc., etc. But I'm just an honest person. I do the research, go out, boots on the ground each year. If I can raise the money, because you can't do it on the little pension that I got, because my pension now is cannibalized every single month for over a decade doing what I'm doing. There's nothing ever left over for me. And just maintaining the equipment that I got, I can no longer keep up with that. I'm just got blind faith that I can keep this operation moving forward, but I can't do the research without the extra gear. You know, like the boat, for instance, that motor went to Alaska 6 times. You can't really expect me to go out in the North Atlantic with an old motor like that, right? And you can't expect an old motor like that not to keep breaking down after a while, because that's exactly what happened to me. And it should be replaced, but to replace the motors, you're 15,000. That's without their controls, by the way, or installation, or taxes. You know what I'm saying, right? And registration, everything else. You got to pay taxes to buy it and blah, blah, blah. Then you got to register it. It's just, how do I do that? See, and you need that to do the research, to go out and do the species counts. And then something else gives up the goes, and something else gives up the goes, and you can't have this, you can't have that. And you always got to buy old stuff and get out there and risk your life, and which is what I'm doing now, of course. We got no choice. We got an extinction event playing out. So they're talking about Guam. My apologies. We're talking about Guam, and they're going to be they had huge radioactive numbers from 1,200 miles away, directly west of the nuclear test site, and they got covered in massive radioactive fallout many, many times from the Bikini Islands and other places. And they're about to get compensation for everybody in Guam because they were poisoned by radioactive fallout. But it's only going to cover stuff, mostly cancers. It's not going to cover the 1,800 illnesses and diseases and autoimmune deficiencies and injuries and illnesses. So like what I do here each night, 5 days a week hopefully, and plus I'm out doing actual research, species counts, and we identify, without the research we would never have been able to prove this is an extinction event. And that's very powerful stuff to go out and have that documentation. Because the truth is very powerful, particularly something like that. And, I do these shows to keep the research alive, to keep the story alive, to keep the planet, to give have this little beacon of light that is honest and sincere and genuine and is trying the best. I would rather hire somebody to do what I'm doing, even though it's very difficult to replicate what I do. But I would rather hire somebody to do what I'm doing. I'd rather hire somebody to go out and do the research, and I would be able to coordinate it all and spread it and everything else. It takes money, you see. It takes huge money. You got to have, you can't do this on $1,000 a month or even $5,000 a month correctly. You got to be able to drop a load of money regularly because you're putting your equipment through harsh conditions and it's going to break down on you. And so I'm not a young person by no shapes or forms, so it's difficult to do anything. And not getting any support from any foundations, not having any organizations give me some relief. I think it's such a betrayal. And you're losing that opportunity, that single opportunity you might never get again, for somebody that's actually sincere and genuine and honest, who's going to do the work and is going to be able to articulate it and understand the significance of it and help her explain that. That's simply unacceptable in a time of endless lies and deceit and deceptions. And we cover it every single day. Like, we have never covered a nuclear story where they were honest, they told the truth, ever. We cover the stories, no matter what story it is this lie, that lie, those lies, these lies, them lies, on to the next story, them lies, these lies, those lies, the whole story. And it's just shocking, right? Because there's no incentive not to be evil for them. There's no incentive for me to do what I'm doing outside. It's the right moral and ethical thing, and it's got to get done. It got to be done right, and you got to be able to back up your assertions, unfortunately. But also, I just turned it into an educational tool, so that's part of the requirement. Is I always try to provide the documentations of my assertions, and I generally, tonight is not an example. I decided not to do it, but 99.9% of my presentations are always chock full of the documentations for the assertions. They're not assertions, they're documentations. So it's not me saying stuff, I'm just grabbing all the documentation, having it at my fingertips and able to incorporate it into the narrative when it's appropriate, right? Everything is well thought out. Absurd amount of work goes into everything I do. Endless, unbelievable, endless. So this guy wants to do salt storage, but that's the technology, right? Yeah, they can do it. It's got to get all this and all that and blah, 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 blah. But pumped hydro and compressed air storage, that's ready to rock and roll. That's ready to rock and roll in 30 days. Nova Wind plugs in 60 megawatt farm in Russia. Wow. Way to go, guys. And Nova Wind commissioned 720 megawatts of wind power in South Russia. SAS, the British SAS guy, lost his toenails and bled from the mouth after drinking nuclear wastewater. That's coming to us all in the near future, isn't it? And I'm just... So here's the video you're watching right now, this one right there. SAA. And if you scroll down below my video, you see all the headlines. And you'll see two ways to donate to me. That's directly to the PayPal, Dana Durnford. And that's over to my website, thenuclearproctologist.org. If you click on the links, they'll take you to... That's the only two ways you can donate to me. Let the page load up. Scroll down below the first picture. And you'll see a donate button. You can donate with credit cards. And if not you, then who? Give them a call and tell them to donate to me. So why is that video not available? I don't know. I'll have to look at that after. And that video is not... Oh yeah, that's the ones you took down from my old site. If you come down a little bit lower, these are pictures from the research expedition. What you're looking at is me covering the whole coastline from British Columbia, Canada to Alaska. And to the left and right are pre-Fukushima to your left. And to the right, what it is in the same spot after Fukushima. This is an extinction event. Japan's nuclear meltdowns, radioactive fallout are an actual extinction level event. And you can download those pictures, print them out, make a little booklet of them. You can make a little booklet of them to tell the story. And if you scroll all the way down, to the bottom, that was a bit quick, right? If you scroll all the way down to the bottom, it takes a while for my page to load up. As you can see it up there, top of the page loading. Just give it a second. If you scroll all the way to the bottom, you'll find all kinds of headlines like this. And you'll find that on each page. And you can match them up to the pictures of the coastline and make a real impressive little book. But underneath my video, you can donate. There's two ways to donate. Credit cards at my site, and there's my PayPal directly to me. All I can do is ask people to help fund this operation, because I ain't going anywhere. I ain't walking away. You know it's me. It only shoots depleted uranium munitions, the A-10 Warthog, and it can shoot 1.5 tons a minute. It was equal to over 44,000 Hiroshima-sized bombs of low-level radiation into brown people's countries. This is how insidious the nuclear industry has never come out and said this is a terrible idea. They don't know about a terrible idea. I don't know what's going on. I have to come in and check my front page, because... But anyway, let me get back here. Yeah, well, what did we do on the poll tonight? Let's have a look at the poll. We got 34 votes. 94% said nuclear power is irrelevant now that renewables are so cheap and dominant. And 6% doesn't understand how the world works, or is just the nuclear industry. Look, we can't come up with solutions. And Fukushima is only, the extinction event is only getting worse. Right? And you can blame those A-10 warthogs on the International Atomic Energy Agency. They've sat in silence while they went out and covered the planet in radioactive fallout. What a terrible industry, which is, of course, United Nations is IAEA. Their whole legacy is just pure madness. Port Angeles, Peaceware. Ella. Good night, everybody. Warren, Nancy, and Dana, Nasana, Truth Seekers, Tree Fruit. Hope everybody's doing good. Sandra Churchill, James Lucet, Dead Tide Pools, yeah. Oh, Kevin Blanche was down there. And Kevin got taken down last week, one of his videos. He wasn't able to use his account till Sunday, I think it was. Chet. Hello, everybody. I only served one king. Hi, Lori. Robert. And good night, everybody. I hope everybody had a good day. Have a good night tonight and a good day tomorrow. Radioactive bananas. I want to go to war, right? If I was able to go to war, I'd be gone to war right now against this industry. I'm gung-ho every single day. I want to get shit done, but I got to watch the little tiny bit of money that I got. If we have any kind of event down here, I won't be able to go check it out because it costs money, right? And so it's not acceptable, but it is what it is. It's not acceptable not to have the resources, but this is what the industry is like, though. It isolates people, and then it eliminates them in increments, if not right away, if it doesn't just come in and stomp on them. I've been under siege forever from the industry. Colette S. Hello, everybody. Timeless. We're almost through the names here. What is a good radiation map? I show you them all the time. Just do a screen capture. Go back through my videos, you'll see all kinds of them. Even tonight I showed you some. Just go to the ones where I expanded them. You can do a screen capture. Radiation is non-stop, unfortunately. Every time you have an earthquake at Fukushima, you can spread more radiation fallout. The industry is insane. Yeah, we had big numbers before I went live there tonight too. I was getting up close to 400 counts per minute. Did I get everybody? Yeah. Well, winter's here, and which means snow is coming. We're supposed to get 15 centimeters starting on Thursday. We got the temperatures too, right? To get more and to keep it. And so we want to get out and do research now. The winter, we're going to need to get a skidoo. A lot of good deals out there right now for $3,000 and $4,000. And the tracks would cost about $4,000. It's probably better to try to get a second-hand skidoo, I guess, rather than putting extra strain on the quad. It's already, we've been using it all fall. Every day or 2 days I'm out in the woods. And so there's a lot of wear and tear. We want to be able to utilize it, get out and do the species count this summer also. I don't know. Like, all we need is a foundation to fund the basics, and we can be doing quite good. Oh well, let's see it, I suppose. Links are below my video for anybody new who wants to donate. And if you know any foundations, ship my information out to them. Get them to have a look at me. We want to do species counts through the winter, no matter what. And so I got to come up with a solution to get me through the winter. Got to get tracks for the quad or get a second-hand skidoo. I'll be happy with that. It's not safe, but I'll be happy with it. God bless everybody. Hugs for everybody. See everybody tomorrow night. Have a great night, folks. Take care.